Clara Watkins had always known that the frontier could steal choices from a woman, but she never imagined it would take the most precious one of all the right to decide, whom she would stand beside for the rest of her life. The settlement elders had met in secret with the Apache leaders, desperate to stop the rising violence that threatened both sides, and when negotiations reached a dead end, they offered something unthinkable. Clara herself. A marriage, they said, would symbolize peace. A woman, they said, would bridge two worlds, and a sacrifice they expected her to make without protest. Clara felt the decision settle over her like the weight of a stone, but she refused to let anyone see her break. She held her spine straight and her eyes steady even when her mother cried and clung to her skirts, even when the men avoided her gaze, even when she realized she no longer belonged to the world she had been raised in. Her heart trembled, but her face stayed calm, because if this was to be her fate, then she would not walk into it looking weak. Atsa, the Apache chief, did not ask for a bride, nor did he welcome the idea. He was a man molded by responsibility, by loss, by the long war between his people and the settlers, he believed. A woman from the settlement could never understand his ways, could never bear the demands placed upon the wife of a chief, could never stand strong in the storms that shaped the Apache nation. When the Peace Council pressed the proposal before him, he accepted only because refusal would bring more bloodshed. He took Clara in name but not in desire, and certainly not in hope. First time he saw her, she wore a plain dress dusted from travel, and her hair was braided with trembling fingers, but her eyes rose to meet his without hesitation. Atsa expected fierce submission, pleading, but what he found was a quiet fire. She did not shrink from him. She did not tremble before him. She simply breathed, as if steadying herself, and inclined her head with the kind of grace he had seen only in warriors who accepted the path laid before them. That moment unsettled him more than if she had cried out in terror. That moment told him she was not the fragile offering he had been promised. She was something unpredictable, and unpredictability was dangerous to a man whose life depended on control. Clara's thoughts churned like river water as she stood before this man who now held her future. His presence was powerful, his shoulders broad, his stance firm, and his gaze sharp as a hawk's. Her first instinct was to guard herself, because every warning she had ever heard about the Apache screamed in her memory. But Atsa did not grab her. He did not speak harshly. He did not treat her as a prize won in battle. He simply watched her, as if trying to understand why she did not crumble when the elders stepped back, leaving them facing one another. Clara felt the final thread connecting her to her old life snap. She was not returning home. Not tonight, not ever, and yet she would not let despair claim her. Instead, she drew a slow breath and told herself she would find a way to live with dignity no matter where this road led. She would face this new world the way she had faced every hardship before, with courage, even if fear whispered beneath. Atsa sensed that courage, and it struck him deep. His people valued strength, and here stood a woman who had been handed to him like a token, yet refused to be small. In that instant he felt a shift within himself, a crack in the wall he had built around his emotions. He did not understand it, and he certainly did not welcome it, but he could not deny it. So as the sun lowered and the air cooled, the unlikely pair took their first steps toward a union. Neither had asked for. The settlement saw a symbol, the tribe saw a strategy. But in the silent space between Clara and Atsa, neither saw peace nor alliance. They saw only the beginning of something neither could name, yet both already felt night settled over the Apache camp with a hush that made every sound feel sharper and every breath feel heavier. Clara followed Atsa toward his lodge, each step echoing with the reality of what awaited her. She tried to keep her chin raised the same way she had earlier in front of her people, but now that she walked deeper into the heart of a world she did not know, the weight on her chest grew heavier. Still, she would not falter, because to show fear would only shrink her, and she refused to be. Atsa walked ahead of her with a stride that carried strength and certainty, yet beneath his composed exterior a storm brewed. He had accepted this marriage for the sake of peace, but he had no intention of forcing a bond with a woman who did not choose him. His people looked to him for leadership, not weakness, and taking a wife who belonged to a rival world unsettled many. He needed to tread carefully, and he intended to keep his distance for her sake and for his own. But the moment she stepped into his shadow, he felt the same strange pull that had caught him earlier, that quiet bravery. She carried like armor. When they reached his lodge, the firelight flickered across the leather walls, casting warm shadows on the ground. Clara hesitated at the threshold, not from fear of him, but from fear of stepping into a life that no longer had familiar corners. She prayed silently for strength. Though she did not know whether anyone listened to settlers in this land, Atza noticed the pause, and instead of urging her inside, he stepped past her and lifted the flap wider, offering room and a sense of welcome without needing to speak. Inside, she found herself surrounded by the scent of pine smoke and tanned hides, and a silence that felt both foreign and soothing. Atza moved with careful, measured motions, his every step steady and deliberate, as he lit a small lamp and placed it between them. The soft glow illuminated his expression, and she saw something she had not expected: restraint. Clara had feared cruelty or indifference, but instead she found a man who seemed determined to keep his composure around her as if she were a storm he could not let sweep him away. Atza watched her from across the space between them, and every detail of her face carved itself into his awareness: the tension in her shoulders, the uncertainty in her breathing, the resolve in her gaze. He felt a tug inside himself that he could not name, and it made him wary, so he kept his distance and spoke gently, explaining that no harm would come to her tonight or any night unless she chose otherwise. His people believed in respect, he said, more through tone than words. He did not intend to take what was not offered. Clara felt her knees weaken at the unexpected kindness. She had spent the journey preparing for the worst, and yet here he was speaking with caution rather than command. She realized she had misjudged him, or rather that she had let the rumors shape her expectations. He was not a savage. He was not a brute. He was a leader burdened by responsibility and uncertainty, much like she was. A strange comfort washed through her, and for the first time since leaving her home, she allowed her guard to lower just enough to breathe fully. They sat in silence for a time, the fire crackling softly like a steady heartbeat. Clara traced the lines of the woven blankets Atza had placed near her, noticing the care in their craftsmanship. Atza watched the way her fingers moved, and something deep inside him tightened. The woman he had accepted out of duty was beginning to stir emotions he had buried long ago, and he feared what that meant for him, for her, and for his people. The tension between them shifted into something neither of them understood. Yet both felt. Clara sensed warmth beneath his reserved nature, and Atza sensed strength beneath her gentle exterior. Every small gesture, every breath shared in that quiet space wove an invisible thread between them. Night deepened outside, and the fire cast a soft glow that wrapped around them like an unspoken promise. They were strangers bound by politics and sacrifice, yet in the shadows of the lodge they sensed the faint first spark of something neither had expected. The fire crackled softly as Clara and Atza sat across from each other in the lodge, the shadows dancing over their faces, creating a world apart from the rest of the camp. Clara felt the weight of his gaze. Even though he did not speak, her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but from an unfamiliar curiosity. She had never allowed herself to feel around a man before. Each movement he made seemed deliberate yet effortless, and she noticed the smallest details. The way his fingers flexed when he reached for the lamp, the vamp, way his eyes softened when they caught the glow of the fire. She felt herself drawn to him in ways that frightened and exhilarated her at the same time. Atza struggled with the pull he felt toward her. His life had been defined by discipline, by duty, and by the constant need to protect his people. He was a chief who had never allowed sentiment to cloud his judgment, and yet the presence of this young woman stirred something within him that made him question the control he had always relied on her courage and quiet strength challenged him in ways he had not anticipated, and he found himself wanting to understand her entirely, not just as a symbol of peace, but as a person who held her own world in her eyes. Clara broke the silence first. With a soft question about the camp, the people, and the life he led, she did not ask to test him or to provoke him. She asked because she wanted to know him. She wanted to see beyond the title of chief, beyond the stories that had painted him as unreachable and fearsome, and he found himself answering not with pride or authority, but with honesty, revealing moments of solitude and thoughtfulness that few had ever witnessed. She felt the subtle power in his words and the vulnerability he allowed himself to show, and it made her heart swell with a mixture of admiration and longing. As the night stretched on, the distance between them seemed to shrink despite the space they occupied. The fire cast a warm glow, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and smoke. Clara felt the tension in her body ease and allowed herself to lean slightly forward. Atza noticed the shift, and it ignited a conflict within him. He had promised to maintain distance, yet the courage she displayed made him want to close the gap. He wanted to offer comfort, and yet he feared that to do so would be to betray the restraint he had lived by for so long. Their hands brushed accidentally when Clara adjusted her blanket, and the touch was electric, a spark that neither could deny. The moment lingered, and both felt it deep in their bones, neither speaking, yet both acknowledging the silent communication that passed between them. She realized that her fear was mingled with intrigue, that her heart was awakening to the possibility of connection. He realized that his control was slipping, that the woman who had entered his life reluctantly had begun to hold sway over his thoughts and emotions. The night outside was quiet except for the distant calls of the tribe and the whisper of wind through the trees. Inside, the lodge time seemed suspended, and each shared glance, each subtle movement wove an invisible bond between them. Clara felt a strange comfort in his presence, a sense of safety she had not known since leaving her home. Atza felt a protective instinct mingled with something more intense, something that made his chest tighten and his mind race. Neither spoke of what they were feeling, yet the energy between them grew undeniable. The night had begun with fear and uncertainty, and now it shimmered with curiosity and desire. Each moment stretched longer and deeper, their connection building quietly like the tide approaching the shore. Clara could sense that this night would mark the beginning of something that would change both of them irrevocably. As the hours passed and the fire dimmed, Clara rested against the blankets, and Atza watched her in silence, feeling the pull of emotions he could not name. He had lost control of the distance he had maintained, yet he did not regret it. He was captivated by her presence, by her courage, and by the subtle power that lay beneath her gentle exterior, and he knew that until dawn, nothing would be the same between them. As the night deepened, Clara felt a warmth in the lodge that was not from the fire alone. She noticed the way Atza's presence seemed to fill the space around her, how his stillness was not emptiness but a quiet strength that pulled her attention toward him. She had spent her journey expecting fear, but instead she found herself on edge with anticipation. Her thoughts tangled between caution and fascination. She wondered how a man so powerful could also be so careful with his actions, so deliberate with his words, and yet so naturally commanding without forcing his will upon her. Atza struggled to maintain the control he had always relied on, his mind a constant battle between duty and desire. He had taken her under his protection, knowing that the tribe and the settlement expected him to treat her with distance. Yet every glance she offered, every movement she made, chipped away at the barrier he had built around his heart. He could sense her bravery as she navigated this foreign world. He could feel her curiosity as she studied him, not as a chief but as a man, and he found it impossible to remain indifferent to the subtle allure she radiated. The firelight flickered across her face, and he was drawn to her in ways he had not expected. The softness in her eyes contradicted the strength in her posture, and it confused him, delighting him, frightening him all at once. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered in his life, and he felt a dangerous longing stirring in the depths of his chest. He tried to remind himself of the rules of conduct, of the responsibility he bore as chief, yet every instinct urged him closer, every thought whispered of the possibility that she could become more than a symbol of peace. Clara sensed the tension in him as if it had taken shape in the air between them. She noticed the slight tightening of his jaw, the deliberate stillness in his hands, and the steady but unspoken rhythm of his breathing. She understood that he was struggling with something unspoken, and she felt a surge of empathy and connection because she too was wrestling with her own emotions, a mixture of fear, fascination, and a growing desire to understand the man behind the title. Their eyes met and held each other in a silent conversation that neither needed to voice. Their proximity felt charged with energy, each subtle movement, each shared glance weaving a thread between their hearts. She felt herself leaning forward, just slightly drawn by the magnetic pull of his presence. He felt himself involuntarily inching closer, drawn by the same irresistible force that neither could name but both felt deep within. Every small interaction became significant. Atsa's hand brushing against hers as he passed the blankets, every word spoken softly carried weight, and every pause seemed to stretch time, as if the night itself were aware of the delicate transformation occurring between them. Clara's heart beat faster at the awareness that this night was unlike any other she had lived through, and Atsa felt the fragile barrier of control he had maintained for years begin to crumble under the intensity of his emotions. Lodge became a world apart from the camp and from the conflicts outside. Its warmth enveloped them in safety, yet within it there was a tension that held promise and uncertainty in equal measure. Clara realized that the fear she had carried from her journey was giving way to curiosity, to admiration, and to an unfamiliar longing. Atsa realized that the duty he had relied upon could no longer contain the powerful connection that had formed between them. Both felt the night pressing against their hearts, bringing them closer in ways that neither had anticipated. As the hours passed and the first hint of dawn approached, their hands met again, deliberately this time, their fingers entwining naturally and effortlessly. Each heartbeat and each breath shared in that quiet space deepened the invisible bond between them. Clara felt a surge of trust and desire, while Atsa felt the thrill of surrendering control, even as he struggled to maintain the discipline he had always known. He was captivated by her in a way that would last beyond the night, and she was captivated by him in a way that promised the beginning of something neither could have imagined before the night stretched on, and Clara felt the lodge shrinking around them into a world of warmth and shadows where time no longer followed the rules of the outside world. She noticed how Atsa's gaze lingered just a fraction longer than it should, and how every motion he made seemed to carry a hidden intent. She felt a flutter in her chest that was new and terrifying and thrilling at the same time. She realized that the fear she had carried from her journey was giving way to fascination and something far deeper, something she did not yet have words for. Atsa felt the same shift within himself, a stirring that both exhilarated and unsettled him. He had never allowed desire to mingle so freely with duty, and he felt the dangerous pull of emotion tugging at his carefully constructed walls. His thoughts kept returning to Clara, to the subtle strength in her posture, to the quiet courage in her eyes, to the gentle confidence with which she navigated a world she had been forced into. He found himself drawn to her with a force that was entirely new and entirely irresistible. The fire cast shadows across the walls of the lodge, and they moved together like an unspoken dance. He noticed the way her fingers traced the folds of the blanket and how her eyes flicked toward him in silent acknowledgement. Clara felt the warmth of his presence surrounding her like a shield, protecting her from the fears that had haunted her on the journey here. She felt a connection that seemed to pulse in the air between them, an invisible thread that grew stronger with every shared glance, every subtle shift of body and breath. The intimacy of the night forced them to confront the emotions they had been avoiding. Clara realized that she had begun to trust him, not as a chief, not as a man of power, but as someone who saw her courage and responded with respect. She felt a desire to reach toward him, to touch and understand the man whose presence had become a constant pull on her heart, Atza felt his own restraint slipping as he became aware of the depth of feeling stirring within him. He wanted to reach for her, to protect her, to draw her closer, to know every nuance of her being. Their hands met again, almost unconsciously, the touch lingering this time longer. And warmer than before, Clara felt a shiver of anticipation run through her body, as if her soul recognized the importance of this moment. She looked into his eyes and saw the same pull reflected there, the tension between control and surrender, the conflict between duty and desire. Atza felt his heart race at the sight of her vulnerability paired with her strength, and he realized that he was captivated by her in a way that could not be contained by tradition or responsibility. Words remained unspoken, yet the air around them vibrated with meaning. Every glance, every breath, every small movement carried significance. Clara felt the intensity of the connection like a current flowing from him to her and back again. She realized that the night had stripped away all pretense and left them facing each other with nothing but truth and emotion. Atza felt the same clarity, his focus narrowing to the woman before him and the irresistible need to bridge the distance that had existed between them. As the night deepened further, they allowed themselves to move closer, the invisible barriers melting away as instinct and feeling guided them. They shared quiet laughter, whispered observations about the camp and the world beyond, and in the silence between words they felt the first tendrils of love and desire curling around their hearts. Clara felt a sense of safety and exhilaration she had never known, and Atza felt a surrender to feeling that was both frightening and liberating. The fire burned lower, and the first hints of dawn began to filter through the lodge. Atza and Clara remained close, their hands entwined, their hearts beating in an unspoken rhythm. They had lost track of fear, lost track of caution, and in that shared vulnerability they discovered a bond neither had anticipated. That night had begun with tension and uncertainty, and yet it would end with a connection that promised everything yet demanded nothing except the willingness to feel. The first rays of dawn crept through the lodge and painted the space with a soft golden light. Clara stirred beneath the blankets, feeling the warmth of the fire fading, but the warmth of Atza's presence still surrounding her. She had never spent a night so close to a man whose reputation had preceded him so strongly, yet now the fear and uncertainty she had carried were replaced by an awareness that their connection had shifted something fundamental between them. Atza watched her quietly from where he sat near the remaining embers of the fire, his gaze gentle and intense at once. He felt the weight of the night pressing upon him, not as a burden but as a revelation. He realized that he had crossed the boundaries he had set for himself, yet the thought did not bring shame. It brought clarity. He could no longer deny the depth of feeling that had grown within him, or the way Clara had become indispensable to his heart. Clara stretched and blinked the sleep from her eyes, noticing the way the firelight caught the lines of his face. She saw not the stern chief she had expected, but a man capable of tenderness and reflection. She felt a strange courage rising within her, the kind that came from surviving the unknown and discovering that the heart could bend without breaking. The night had revealed the complexities of Atza that no rumors or stories could have conveyed, and she felt gratitude that he had allowed her into this intimate world. Even as she wondered what the consequences might be, Atza moved closer and offered her a drink from a small cup he held carefully, his hand steady despite the faint tremor of emotion he could not hide. He spoke softly, asking if she had slept, and if she felt safe. Clara nodded, even as her heart raced at the nearness of him. She understood that this simple exchange carried more meaning than either of them could articulate. It was a gesture of care, respect, and emerging trust, a sign that they were beginning to navigate the terrain of each other's hearts and minds. They spoke quietly about the events of the previous day and the night they had shared, in a tone that mingled reflection with subtle warmth. Clara found herself laughing softly at an observation he made, and was surprised at the ease with which She did so, Atsa felt a similar astonishment at how effortlessly her presence had begun to settle into his life. The man who had expected duty alone now felt curiosity, desire, and protectiveness coiling around his heart, and he did not resist the lodge remained a quiet sanctuary as the camp outside slowly awakened. The sounds of movement, distant voices, and the calls of animals reminded them of the world beyond, yet inside that space-time felt suspended. Their connection had grown stronger during the hours of darkness, and now the light revealed the depth of the bond that neither had yet dared to name. Clara noticed how his eyes softened when he looked at her, how every movement was measured yet gentle. She felt a shiver of recognition that something irreversible had begun. Atsa recognized the delicate balance between what he owed his people and what he felt for her. He knew that the events of the night could not be undone, and that the way he had surrendered to feeling had altered the course of both their lives. He also realized that Clara's courage in facing this unfamiliar world had shifted his own perception of strength and trust. She was no longer simply a bride given to him by circumstance. She had become a partner in a journey that was just beginning. The morning unfolded with quiet moments of understanding and unspoken acknowledgement. Clara felt gratitude for his restraint and kindness. Atsa felt awe at her resilience and willingness to engage with a world so foreign yet intimate. She sensed in him a protective tenderness that was mirrored by her own growing desire to support and understand him. The boundaries between duty and emotion had blurred, and both felt the thrilling yet terrifying weight of what lay ahead as the sun climbed higher and the lodge filled with light. They continued to share proximity and quiet conversation. Their hands brushed naturally, their glances met in silent recognition, and both understood that the night had changed everything. Neither could return to the way things had been. Clara felt the stirrings of affection and trust she had never anticipated, and Atsa felt a new vulnerability mingled with longing that promised an intimacy beyond what either had known. The first night had left its mark, and the morning revealed that they were no longer strangers, but participants in a story that was just beginning. Word of Clara's presence in the Apache camp spread quickly among the tribe, and curiosity mingled with caution as whispers traveled from lodge to lodge. The people had long respected Atsa for his strength and wisdom, but the arrival of a bride from the settlers brought attention that was difficult to ignore. Some elders questioned the wisdom of accepting her, fearing she might disrupt the balance they had fought to maintain. Others watched silently, trying to discern how the chief would handle this unexpected circumstance. Atsa knew that every glance, every murmur carried weight, and he also understood that the way he treated Clara in these early hours would set the tone for how his people would perceive her, and by extension, how the fragile peace would endure. Clara felt the eyes of the tribe upon her, and the weight of expectation pressed upon her like a stone. She had survived the journey across harsh lands and endured uncertainty, yet this scrutiny felt different. It was a test not of survival, but of her ability to belong to a world that was not hers. She sensed both skepticism and fascination from the people around her, and she realized that her actions mattered far beyond herself. Every gesture, every careful word became a measure of her courage and adaptability. She also noticed how Atsa moved among his people. His presence, commanding yet measured, his leadership was evident not in loud declarations, but in the quiet confidence and respect he inspired in others. Despite the tension, Clara found a strange comfort in watching him interact with his people. She saw the patience in the way he addressed questions, the firmness in the guidance he offered, and the subtle ways he ensured that his tribe understood that she was under his protection. Yet she also noticed the moments when his gaze returned to her fleetingly, as if checking to ensure she remained safe and comfortable. She felt a pulse of warmth in that awareness, knowing that the man who had been entrusted with her life had already placed her in his heart. Atsa sensed the tribe's scrutiny and felt the added pressure to demonstrate both strength and compassion. He understood that any misstep could lead to distrust or worse yet disapproval that might threaten the delicate peace with the settlers, he also understood that Clara was more than a symbol, and that he needed to honor the connection they had begun to form during the night. She had earned his respect and stirred his heart in ways that challenged him to balance desire with responsibility and emotion with tradition. The morning unfolded. With small interactions that carried hidden significance, Clara greeted members of the tribe politely and observed quietly while Atsa monitored each movement. He noted her attentiveness and her willingness to learn the subtle customs of the people she had been thrust among. He felt a surge of pride and a protective instinct that mingled with the unspoken bond between them. Clara noticed this in him, and it gave her courage to navigate the unfamiliar world she now inhabited. Whispers continued to circulate, but they began to shift in tone as the tribe observed Clara's composure, her courage, and the evident respect Atsa showed her. Initial uncertainty and skepticism began to give way to curiosity and tentative acceptance. The chief's measured interactions with both Clara and his people demonstrated that their union need not be a source of division, but could become a symbol of harmony if approached with wisdom and care. As the day progressed, Clara and Atsa found moments to share. Quietly amidst the bustle, she noticed how he guided her with subtle gestures, how his presence created a buffer against intrusive eyes, and how he offered explanations of customs she might not understand. She felt the reassurance of his care and the subtle thrill of intimacy that could exist even in the midst of scrutiny. Atsa felt the deepening of his connection to her strengthened by the challenges of the morning and aware that their relationship was evolving in ways that required patience, observation, and trust. By midday, the atmosphere among the tribe began to change. Clara sensed that the skepticism was softening, replaced by a cautious admiration for her courage and the emerging bond between her and the chief. Atsa recognized the Fedzin's shift as well and felt a sense of relief that his people were beginning to see her not just as an outsider, but as someone worthy of respect and protection. Their connection was no longer hidden within the lodge. It was acknowledged subtly by the tribe, and it carried the promise that what had begun in the quiet of night could extend into the day without being diminished by fear or misunderstanding. Tranquility of the morning was shattered by the distant sound of hooves pounding against the dusty ground. Clara's heart leapt as she recognized the urgency in the rhythm of the horses and the voices calling out from the direction of the settlement. Her stomach clenched with fear as memories of the journey and the uncertainty of her fate returned. Atsa tensed immediately, sensing danger from the moment he heard the commotion. He moved with the instinctive precision of a man trained to protect his people and those under his care. His eyes locked on hers, briefly conveying a message without words that she was to remain calm and trust him. Riders emerged from the horizon, a small group of men from the settlement who had been tracking Clara since she left. Their faces were set with determination and anger. They demanded her return, claiming she had been taken against her will. They shouted accusations at the camp, warning of consequences if she was not returned, and Clara's heart wavered between fear and defiance. She realized that her life had become the battleground for forces far larger than herself, and that she would have to make choices quickly in order to preserve both her safety and the fragile peace between the two worlds. Satsa stepped forward, his presence alone commanding attention and silence. His voice rose not in anger, but in authority, explaining to the men that Clara was under his protection and that any attempt to force her from the camp would result in immediate conflict. His stance was unwavering, and his eyes conveyed a warning that left no room for negotiation. The men hesitated, recognizing the danger in challenging the chief directly, yet their persistence and entitlement made it clear they would not retreat easily. Clara felt a rush of admiration and relief. She realized that the man who had been distant the night before was now the protector of her life, willing to face danger without hesitation. She also understood that she was no longer a passive participant in her fate. Her own courage stirred within her, urging her to speak her mind. and assert the choices that belonged to her, she took a deep breath and found her voice, asking that she be allowed to decide where she would go and with whom. She declared that she would not return to the settlement against her will, and that her loyalty had shifted to the man who had earned her trust. The tension between the groups escalated briefly as words were exchanged with Atsa. Maintaining calm while projecting unyielding authority, Clara observed his skill in handling the threat with precision, balancing restraint with strength. She felt the deep bond between them crystallize in that moment, a combination of trust, respect, and emerging affection that neither could deny. The men from the settlement realized that their previous assumptions about her status were invalid, and that any further insistence would provoke conflict. They were not prepared to face Itza's people, gathered around him, subtly reinforcing his authority and showing solidarity with the stance he had taken. Clara sensed their support and felt a quiet surge of pride, knowing that she was being protected not only by the chief but by an entire community. Willing to honor her choice, her own resolve strengthened as she realized that she now belonged to a place where her courage and will were recognized and valued. The men from the settlement finally withdrew, reluctantly understanding that their demands would not be met and that Clara's fate would not be dictated by fear or force. They departed with warnings and threats that neither Atsa nor Clara took lightly, but the immediate danger had passed. Clara exhaled a long breath, feeling the adrenaline ebb and her confidence rise. She had spoken and been heard, and in the presence of the chief and his people she had found a place where her voice mattered. The camp returned to its rhythm. Clara and Atsa stood together, surveying the land there. Proximity, a reminder of the bond that had been forged through the night and now tested in the light of day. Their hands brushed naturally, and the connection between them felt unbreakable despite the external pressures. Both understood that the challenges of the world outside could not undo the trust and intimacy that had begun to flourish between them, and that the choices they made from this point forward would define the depth of their shared journey. The tension of the day left the camp, and a fragile, quiet Clara walked beside Atsa, feeling the lingering weight of the confrontation earlier. The men from the settlement had departed, but their presence still hung in the air as a reminder that the world beyond the lodge was unpredictable and often dangerous. She felt a mix of relief and lingering anxiety, yet she also felt a growing confidence, knowing that she had faced the threat and had been heard and protected by the chief, whose heart and mind were now intertwined with her own. Atsa moved with measured steps, aware that every action he took reflected not only his authority but the bond he was forming with Clara. He could feel the eyes of his people on them, and he knew that his decision to protect her openly would define her place in the tribe. He sensed her courage, and the way she had spoken for herself had strengthened his resolve, and he realized that he was no longer acting solely from duty. He was acting from something far deeper, something that entwined desire, loyalty, and the unspoken acknowledgement that she was now part of his life in a way that demanded his protection and his heart. Clara noticed the shift in him, the subtle relaxation in his posture, the softness in his gaze that had been absent before. She felt a warmth spread through her as she realized that the man who had seemed distant the night they first met was now a partner in the unspoken dance of trust and intimacy. They walked in silence, yet each movement conveyed meaning. The brush of their hands, the shared glances, the quiet breathing, all spoke volumes of a connection neither had fully named, but both understood. Morning carried them to a secluded spot near the river, where the sound of flowing water offered a moment of respite from the pressures of the camp and the lingering tension of the outside world. Clara paused to admire the sunlight glinting off the rippling surface, and Atsa stood behind her, noticing the way she observed the beauty of the land with quiet awe. He felt a surge of affection and protectiveness that made him want to keep her close, and yet he respected her space, understanding that true connection was built on choice and mutual understanding. Their conversation drifted to shared stories of the past, each revealing glimpses of life and experience. Clara spoke of her home, of the journey, and the fears she had carried, while Atsa shared memories of his tribe of battles fought and wisdom gained over years of leadership. The exchange was gentle yet profound, and both realized that they were learning to trust each other, not only with their lives but with their hearts. Clara felt the thrill of understanding a man who had been a stranger hours ago, and Atsa felt the warmth of allowing someone into his inner world whose presence challenged and captivated him. As the sun moved higher, the atmosphere shifted from reflection to a quiet anticipation. They sensed that the moment they had been dancing around since the night of their first meeting was drawing near. Clara felt a shiver of awareness that something irreversible was about to unfold. She looked to Atsa and saw the same longing mirrored in his eyes, and understood that neither would step back now from the path they had begun to navigate together. Atsa took a step closer, his hand brushing against hers naturally and deliberately. His touch carried an unspoken promise of protection, desire, and shared vulnerability. Clara's heart responded instantly, her breath catching as she allowed herself to lean slightly into him, feeling the warmth of his presence envelop her. She sensed the intensity of the bond that had grown over a single night and a challenging morning, and realized that they were on the cusp of surrendering fully to what had begun between them. In that quiet space by the river, they paused together, the world around them fading into insignificance, their hands entwined, their hearts beating in sync, and they acknowledged without words that the connection they had forged could no longer be ignored. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and opposition, and emerged stronger together. Clara felt a profound sense of trust and belonging, while Atsa felt the thrill of embracing a bond that honored both duty and desire. They were united not only by circumstance but by choice and the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the river and the camp. Clara and Atsa remained near the water, their hands intertwined and their hearts beating with a rhythm that spoke of shared understanding and unspoken promises. The events of the past day had transformed them from strangers bound by duty into partners bound by choice. They had faced fear together, endured scrutiny together, and discovered in each other a strength that neither had anticipated yet. Both now relied upon. Clara felt a sense of peace and exhilaration as she looked at Atsa. She had arrived at the camp with trepidation, expecting coldness or indifference, and yet she found warmth, patience, and an intensity of feeling that stirred her heart in ways she had never known. She realized that her courage had not only protected her life but had also inspired trust and affection in a man whose life had been defined by discipline and responsibility. She had become more than a symbol of peace. She had become an integral part of his world, and he had become a presence she could rely upon completely. Atsa studied her with an intensity that was both commanding and tender. His life had always demanded control and restraint, yet Clara's presence had introduced a vulnerability he did not resist. Her strength and openness had captured him completely, and he realized that he would never be able to view her as anything less than vital to his heart and mind. He felt a sense of awe at her resilience, at the way she met his gaze without fear, and at the way she had chosen to step fully into the uncertain world of his people. The tribe watched quietly as the chief and his bride moved together, a subtle acknowledgement passing through the camp that a bond had formed that could not be broken. The elders whispered among themselves, recognizing the courage and integrity Clara had shown and the careful yet undeniable affection Atsa displayed. His people saw not a passive bride, but a woman whose presence had changed the chief and whose loyalty and bravery inspired respect. They began to understand that the connection forged in the quiet of the lodge and tested by the challenges of the day could serve as a symbol of unity rather than division. As evening approached, Atsa led Clara back to the lodge where the fire still glowed softly, creating a cocoon of warmth and intimacy. They sat together in the quiet moments before nightfall, speaking gently about the future, about the responsibilities they would share, and about the bond that had grown between them. Clara felt her heart swell with trust and anticipation, knowing that the man beside her had chosen to protect not only her life but her spirit, he felt the weight and joy of responsibility tempered by the exhilaration of finally embracing the depth of feeling he had fought to suppress. The sky darkened, gradually revealing stars that mirrored the sparks that had ignited between them since their first night together. Clara rested her head lightly against his shoulder and felt the steady beat of his heart, a reassuring presence that promised safety and devotion. Atsa wrapped an arm around her, drawing her closer yet respecting the space. She needed to feel autonomy and dignity in their relationship, they had learned. The delicate balance of desire and respect, and they both understood that their bond had been strengthened, not only by passion but by trust, courage, and shared vulnerability. As the night deepened, the lodge became a sanctuary where they could be themselves, where words were sometimes unnecessary, and where touch and presence conveyed more than speech could achieve. They remained close until sleep approached, embracing the quiet intimacy. They had discovered their connection had endured scrutiny, danger, and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger and more profound than either had imagined. Clara felt a deep sense of belonging and fulfillment, while Atsa felt captivated not only by her beauty and courage but by the strength of her character and the depth of the connection they had forged. By the time the first light of dawn hinted at the horizon, they were intertwined in a bond that had been tested and proven resilient. Their hearts beat in unison, and they understood that the trials of the past day and night had forged a connection that would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The chief and his bride had discovered in each other a partner, a protector, and a had discovered in each other a partner, a protector, and a confidant, and they would carry that understanding forward into the days and nights to come, knowing that their first night together had changed everything, and that their union would endure with passion, respect, and unwavering devotion.